Death may be the last great adventure in the real world, but in video games, more often than not, it's the greatest penalty a player will face. So much so that permadeath has been introduced as a feature for the bravest of souls in a handful of titles as the ultimate challenge. If you mess up, it's game over, and you have to start all over again. But there are ways to cheat the Grim Reaper, whether by design or by sheer fluke. And honestly, we don't care either way. If it means we can escape death, we'll do whatever it takes to stay alive. From teleporting out of combat to cheesing your way out of a fatal encounter, here are 9 always inventive and sometimes silly ways games let you defy death. We're all familiar with the basic formula of most video games. You start off as a grizzled hero and meander through the story, trying not to get yourself killed in the process. There are plenty of exceptions to the rule, but in the instances where you're a puppet master of multiple characters, switching between party members is a cheeky workaround when your character is about to snuff it and you need to bail out. Agents of Mayhem's 3-man team is the ultimate embodiment of this feature, letting you switch between characters willy-nilly as you romp around the streets of Seoul, taking on the cartoonish bad guys Legion. If things get too hairy, the push of a button will give you a new avatar and a full HP gauge to play with. GTA 5 has a similar mechanic, letting you ascend to the heavens for a brief moment when the fuzz are getting too close for comfort, before plunging you back down to take possession of one of the other protagonists, who is also contributing to the downfall of Los Santos in his own, equally illegal but significantly less perilous way. It may feel like a cop-out, but it works like a charm. Most of the time. When it doesn't, you'll find out the hard way. Knocking back a potion or chugging on a mana bottle to replenish health and magic is a universally accepted concept. It might seem ludicrous, but when it comes to the crossover of magical realms and video games, we're more than happy to suspend our disbelief. It helps us to accept scenarios where we take a liberal peppering of bullets to the chest but are back on our feet seconds later, or jump off a building into a pile of hay, breaking no bones whatsoever. If you were to scrutinise them too closely, almost any of these mechanics will seem absurd. Like rummaging on your bag for a snack in the midst of a bandit ambush, for example. Everyone's favourite RPG checks the boxes when it comes to health replenishing potions, but chowing down on a raw potato or a wheel of cheese in the face of a rampaging dragon really does take the biscuit. Finding ingredients to cook up a batch of nourishing soup in Skyrim is fine. It's almost like real life. It's the slurping it up while everyone around you presses pause on caving your noggin in that's laughable. Working your way through a banquet when you're on the cusp of death is pure silliness. But if it pulls us back from the edge of the abyss, we'll have 10 more wheels of cheese and a side of venison, please. Fast travel is a welcome answer to the sprawling expanses some games offer, whether they're vast fantasy landscapes or the arid desert of the post-apocalypse. You could argue that using shortcuts like these risks breaking the immersion, and that slogging through the wilderness is all just a part of the fun. However the fast travel mechanic is justified in game and whether or not you decide to use it, developers usually draw the line at letting players beam away when there's the slightest whiff of danger or certain death. You can't wriggle out of your impending doom that easily. You have to put on your big boy pants and deal with it. Except on those rare occasions when fleeing in the middle of a fight is a perfectly acceptable course of action to take. In 505 Games Portal Knights, you can do exactly that, teleporting back to the comfort of your home island at the drop of a hat. In over your head with a golem, being swarmed by grunts, no problem. Just navigate the menu as if your life depended on it, because it does, and you're away. If there was ever a cheaper way to squirm out of the clutches of death, we've yet to see it. Not being killed is the unspoken objective of almost every game. Yes, finding my in-game son is important, but there's no point arriving at his door in a body bag for the worst reunion since the last time you sat down to watch an episode of Jerry Springer. So of course we find ourselves kitted out with the basics, regardless of our background. It doesn't matter if you started out in life as a housewife or a vagabond. As long as you've got hands, paws, or claws to hold something pointy in, you can carve out a name for yourself on your adventure. Which is exactly why the hiding in cupboards and drawers like an abject coward genre can seem ridiculous at times. Whether it's tiptoeing around a spaceship to avoid a sci-fi nightmare in alien isolation, or trying to rescue your wife from warring cultists in Outlast 2, the instinct to grab a wrench or a plank of wood with a nail on the end seems as impossible as wielding Thor's hammer to our characters. Forget cracking a few skulls to save your pregnant wife. She can fend off her attackers on her own.
Swear to Christ, the first person who touches me loses their eyes!
Meanwhile, you can squeeze under the nearest bed until the coast is clear. We know survival horror doesn't have to be all violence and gore, but when stuffing yourself into a barrel is a surefire way to keep breathing rather than bashing some decrepit old hillbilly's brains in, it does beg a belief. One way to reconcile the actions of a player and the narrative of a game is to design it so that when they inevitably screw up, it doesn't matter. Because it never actually happened. It may sound nonsensical, but the Assassin's Creed series is all about syncing your actions with your ancestors' memories in the Animus, and the most recent reboot of the King's Quest franchise writes off any deaths as a ramblings of an old monarch getting carried away with his own stories. Squished by a rock? Eaten by a dragon? Succumbed to a trap? It's not a problem because Grandpa was just messing with you, and here's what really happened. When it comes down to it, kicking the bucket in these games is about as meaningless as in any other. But the sentiment is rammed home that it really doesn't matter what you do, because the whole thing is a glorified flashback. Technically, this next entry isn't so much a design feature as it is rage quitting or outright cheating, and hoping that the game didn't autosave as you hurtled towards your untimely demise. Turning off your console mid-game used to be a tried and tested method to dealing with insurmountable odds, but now you can navigate to your desktop or home screen and shut down the game before the proverbial hits the fan. If you've got a nose for sensing when everything's about to go south, you can do something slightly less dramatic and quick save the hell out of your every move. Quite literally. Admittedly, it's not the most efficient way to play, but why would there be a quick save option at all if the developer didn't want you to take advantage of it? It's not quite cheating, so it gets a pass. Back in ancient times when FMV sequences and loading screens were a thing, moving around a map like Resident Evil's mansions and Resident Evil 2's police stations could be a bit of a rigmarole. You couldn't just swing open a door and waltz through it like you kids on your doors today. But it wasn't all bad. Wading through the mounting tension in abandoned rooms and spooky looking corridors was almost certainly going to result in an ambush and jump scare that would knock years off your life. And before you had time to let that sink in, you'd be faced with a terrifying enemy intent on chasing you to the ends of the earth. Unless, of course, you manage to dash through a door, blocking its path for all eternity. Those loading screen doors were lifesavers for the cowardly or unprepared, and we'll never forget their service. The rewind mechanic is another way to undo player deaths by giving them a do-over without making them feel like they're walking a path that has already been mapped out for them. Games like Braid use a rewind function to eliminate the prospect of death altogether, letting you run rampant without a care in the world. Because the ability isn't treated as a resource that needs to be refueled, you can turn back time until the cows come home to navigate the obstacles and puzzles on your way to rescuing the princess. It saves on respawns and will keep you from tearing your hair out in frustration, so it gets a great big thumbs up from us. Generally speaking, there are two schools of thought when it comes to cheesing. The first is that it's just plain cheating. Manipulating the game to make it easier is a down and dirty way for bottom dwellers to play. On the other hand, you could argue that anything goes so long as the game lets you do it. Many a boss has been brought down by an imaginative use of terrain, by taking advantage of clipping, and generally using everything at our disposal in the surrounding environment to make our virtual life just that much simpler. Finding inventive ways to tackle in-game challenges is a skill in itself, and games like Dark Souls seem built on the notion of players pushing and pulling at the boundaries of game design to cheese their way to victory. If thinking outside of the box is wrong, then we don't want to be right. Whether they're an ingenious mechanic or a total fudging of the system, these death-defying tricks will let you ward off the cold, clammy hands of the Grim Reaper for a scooch longer. The jury may be out on exactly how clever or acceptable they are, but we'll take whatever help we can get.